Scott McClellan is talking, and there is plenty of reaction to the latest bombshell leveled against the White House. Good evening, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly.
And I'm Bill Hemmer. There's also breaking news this hour in the polygamous custody case. A Texas Supreme Court ruling expected out of Lone Star State minutes. So stay tuned for that, too, coming up shortly.
All this great hope that we were going to come to Washington and change it. And then we got to Washington, and I think we got caught up in playing the Washington game the way it's played today.
Well, McClellan's tell-all book is called What Happened? And today, a lot of people are asking that same question to the president's former press secretary, Scott McClellan. The one-time Bush spokesman speaking out for the first time today about his very controversial memoir, saying President Bush sold the Iraq war to Americans through a, quote, deceptive propaganda campaign, making a conscious decision to turn away from candor and honesty. That, according to McClellan. Former White House Assistant Press Secretary Reed Dickens is here now with his reaction. He is written about in the book. Hi, Reed.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Your reaction to this latest claim, he makes quite clear, both in his interview on the Today Show this morning and in the book, that he doesn't outright call President Bush a liar, but that the president and his advisors made a conscious decision to mislead the American people.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think he's wrong on substance and it's inappropriate in timing. First, on substance, Scott was a deputy press secretary in the build-up to the war. It's been much talked about these last couple days that he wasn't a part of the war planning on a message level or on a policy level, nor were his opinions on policy would they have mattered. A communicator's job is to articulate the positions of their boss, as Dee Dee Meyer said a couple days ago. On timing, this is obviously inappropriate. Scott McClellan did not have a professional or political identity that predated Bush. President Bush was very good to him. He stood on President Bush's shoulders for 8 years with no qualms, no problems, never voiced any reservations, asked anyone to tone anything down or expressed any concern. And now to do this in the president's final year, I think is inappropriate at best. But this morning when he was challenged on the Today Show about the fact that he was out of loop during the period of time leading up to the war, his response was absurd. He said, well, one time my boss, Ari Fleischer, was out of town and I filled in for him for a couple of days. Well, I think that pretty much makes the point that Scott was not even a part of the war planning and the message planning. And if he had a problem with the war or any policy on principle or moral grounds, then taking the job, being the spokesperson for the president to the world during the war and keeping the job for 3 years was probably not the best line of work for him. Still,
Reed, I mean, there's no question. I think even Scott McClellan would admit that what he has done here is not the most loyal act he's ever taken with respect to President Bush. But the American people tonight could be focused on not so much that personal relationship, but what he's saying about this Iraq war. And what he's saying is that we did not go to war in Iraq for oil, as some of President Bush's critics might allege, or, as the White House told us, to rout out weapons of mass destruction. He is saying we went there because the White House had a plan to establish a foothold of democracy in the Middle East, and they didn't think the American public would support the war if they knew that was the real purpose, so we were sold a bag of goods.
Well, and again, Megyn, all I can tell you is from his perch in the lower press office where he was assigned to deal with education and health and human services, that may have been what he thought. He wasn't a part of the planning for the war. He was a level 2 spokesperson. And I think, and by the time he took the press secretary job, the war, was already in motion. So a lot of this just doesn't add up. And he also floats a lot of very serious accusations at the president without any instances or facts to back it up. To say that there was this propaganda machine, there was all this deception going on, but there weren't any specifics put forth in the book. So I was just a little hurt by it myself.
Reed, let me ask you, let me set this up for you because we've got a soundbite. He does explain on the Today Show what it was that sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for him, and he talks about how back in April of 2006, when the perjury case against Scooter Libby was unfolding, a reporter asked President Bush the question, who declassified a 2002 intelligence report so that it could be leaked to reporters to justify the war in Iraq? Was it you, Mr. President, who declassified a classified report so it could be leaked to justify the war? Here's McClellan talking about that.
A reporter had yelled a question to the president, trying to ask him about this revelation that came out during the legal proceedings. And the revelation was that it was the president who had authorized or enabled Scooter Libby to go out there and talk about this information. And I told the president that's what the reporter was asking about. He's saying that you yourself were the one that authorized the leaking of this information. And he said, yeah, I did.
And he said that was the final straw for him, Reed, that he realized he'd been lied to, and that's what, or he didn't quite say lied, but he'd been misled by the president. Your response to that?
There's no question Scott has a very valid beef with the White House when it comes to the Valerie Plame instance, when it comes to the declassification of these documents. There is no tougher job than to be a White House press secretary in the Bush administration. The White House press secretary is often shut out of important conversations, is cut out of the loop, as people like to say in the Beltway. So there's no question he was hung out to dry when it came to Valerie Plame, and he has some very legitimate beefs. But I think he fell into an age-old D.C. trap of thinking that his opinion as a staffer to a president was much more important than it was. I think, one time I was inserted myself into a conversation that the president was having, and the president said, Reed, that's a great point. He said, if you feel so emphatically about that, then maybe you should raise $300 million and run for president. And I think that applies here. I think Scott could have either resigned the way people did under Gerald Ford, or he could go run for Congress. But to come out with a book like this and weigh in his feelings on whether the war was a strategic mistake when he wasn't a part of the planning, I think it's just a little inappropriate.
Understood. Reed Dickens, thanks so much for your insights on it.
Thanks for having me on, guys.